All right, let's talk about one of the most horrifying, relentless, and utterly nightmarish forces in the entire Warhammer 40k universe, the Tyranid hive fleets. These creatures don't just conquer, they consume. They don't seek power, wealth, or ideological supremacy. They exist for one reason and one reason only: to devour everything in their path. No negotiations, no truces, just an all-consuming hunger that stretches across the void. But here's the real question. Is the Great Devourer truly the ultimate terror? Or could it be just the first wave of something far worse? What if the hive fleets we've seen so far are nothing more than scouts, mere tendrils of an entity so vast and alien that we can't even comprehend its full scale? If the Imperium and the other factions of the galaxy are struggling against the forces we know now, what happens if the true bulk of the Tyranid presence arrives? It's a terrifying thought, and one that shakes even the most hardened commanders of the Imperium. Because if what we've seen is only the beginning, then what's coming next could spell the end of everything. The Tyranids aren't just another alien race vying for control of the galaxy. They are something entirely different. They don't have empires, political structures, or even a culture in any traditional sense. They are a force of nature, a biological storm that sweeps through the stars, consuming everything in its path, leaving only barren, lifeless worlds in its wake. The Imperium calls them the Great Devourer, and for good reason. No other threat operates on the same horrifying scale, and no other force in the galaxy embodies such an absolute and relentless hunger. Unlike most other factions in Warhammer 40k, the Tyranids don't function as individual beings. Every single creature, from the smallest Ripper to the most massive Bio-Titan, is simply an extension of a single vast intelligence, the hive mind. This isn't just some advanced form of telepathic communication. It's an all-encompassing, all-controlling will that shapes and directs every Tyranid organism with terrifying efficiency. A single Hormigant on its own is just a mindless beast, but when guided by the hive mind, it becomes part of an unstoppable tide, a perfectly coordinated assault where every creature knows exactly what to do without hesitation. That's what makes the Tyranids so uniquely terrifying. Other factions have weaknesses, internal divisions, and logistical problems. The Imperium is bloated and bureaucratic. The Eldar are dwindling. Chaos is powerful but unpredictable. Even the Necrons, with all their ancient technology, are fractured and disorganized. But the Tyranids? They are pure, undiluted efficiency. There's no dissent, no hesitation, no deviation from their single driving purpose: to consume biomass and evolve into something even deadlier. And the worst part, they're always learning. Every battle against the Tyranids isn't just a war, it's a test. Every lost hive fleet, every defeated swarm, every setback only serves to make them stronger. The hive mind is constantly analyzing, adapting, and refining its approach. If a particular weapon proves effective against Tyranid warriors, the next wave will come with adaptations to counter it. If a psychic defense is strong enough to disrupt their synaptic control, the hive mind finds ways to overcome it. There is no such thing as a wasted engagement for the Tyranids. They never retreat out of fear, only to return stronger, more evolved, and more prepared for the next battle. This is what makes them a different kind of threat. The Imperium can fight orcs for centuries, and orcs will still be orcs, brutal, disorganized, and thriving on sheer anarchy. Chaos can wage war for millennia, but its forces are driven by unpredictable whims of dark gods. But the Tyranids? They are inevitable. Their victories make them stronger, and their losses only push them to adapt and come back deadlier than before. No one else in this galaxy fights like this. And then there's the sheer scale of the invasion. The hive fleets that have reached the Milky Way so far are already responsible for some of the most devastating conflicts in Imperial history. Worlds that have stood for thousands of years are wiped clean in a matter of days. Entire sectors have been lost to the Tyranid advance. And yet, There's this lingering, terrifying idea among many scholars and war strategists. What if this is just the beginning? Many fan theories suggest that what we've seen of the Tyranids so far is nothing more than an advanced scouting force. The idea is horrifying, but it makes sense. The hive fleets that have reached the galaxy didn't come from within. They came from the dark void beyond, from a space so vast and unknowable that even the Imperium's farthest-reaching explorations haven't mapped it. And if that's the case, what if the true Tyranid presence is still out there? What if what we've fought so far isn't the real invasion, but merely the initial probing tendrils of something much, much worse? Some even believe that the hive mind is testing the galaxy, measuring its strength before committing its full forces. Maybe the current waves are just disposable vanguard fleets, meant to gauge resistance and gather as much genetic material as possible before the real assault begins. And if that's true, then the battles we've seen so far, the fall of Macragge, the devastation of Baal, the countless other Imperial losses, might be nothing more than the prelude to an extinction-level event on a galactic scale. That's what makes the Tyranids unlike anything else in Warhammer 40k. They aren't just an enemy to be fought. They are a countdown to something worse. The Great Devourer isn't just a name, it's a warning. And the galaxy might not be ready for what comes next. No one truly knows where the Tyranids came from. The Imperium has its theories, the Eldar have their warnings, and the Magi of the Adeptus Mechanicus have dissected countless specimens in the hopes of uncovering some hidden truth. But at the end of the day, the reality remains terrifyingly simple. Whatever the Tyranids are, whatever spawned them, they are completely alien to our galaxy. They are not some ancient race reclaiming lost territory. They are not an accident of evolution or a rogue AI gone mad. They are an outside force, an intrusion from the void beyond the galactic rim, and that fact alone makes them more horrifying than anything else. Many in the Imperium assume that the first recorded Tyranid invasion, when Hive Fleet Behemoth struck Macragge, was their true arrival, but that idea itself is flawed. There had already been signs before then, whispers of something lurking in the darkness. Strange disappearances of outlying colonies, drifting ships stripped of all organic matter, entire worlds where every living thing, flora and fauna alike, was consumed down to the microbial level. The Imperium, as arrogant as ever, ignored the warnings until it was too late. By the time the Ultramarines fought their desperate battle against Behemoth, the Tyranids had already begun their slow and steady creep into the galaxy. But if they didn't originate here, where did they come from? This is where the theories become truly unsettling. One of the most widely accepted ideas is that the Tyranids are simply the latest iteration of an evolutionary cycle that has played out countless times in countless galaxies before this one. Perhaps in some far-off corner of existence, a single predatory organism emerged, one with the ability to consume and adapt on a genetic level. Maybe over eons, it refined itself into something greater, something more efficient, until it eventually became the hive mind, an intelligence so vast and insatiable that it began consuming entire planetary systems, stripping them bare before moving on. And if that's true, then our galaxy is just another meal, not the first and certainly not the last. Some speculate that the Tyranids may have already devoured other galaxies before reaching us. If that's the case, then we aren't fighting a war for survival. We are simply delaying the inevitable. The hive fleets we see now could be nothing more than a fraction of their true force, the tendrils of a much greater entity that exists far beyond the limits of our understanding. But there's an even darker possibility. What if the Tyranids were created? There are whispers among the more radical Magi biologists that the Tyranids are not a naturally evolved species at all, but an engineered plague, a biological weapon designed by some unknown force for a purpose we can't yet comprehend. The sheer perfection of their evolutionary process, their adaptability, and the terrifying unity of the hive mind suggest a level of deliberate design. If that's the case, Who or what created them? And why? Were they meant to be a weapon that turned on its creators? Or worse, are they still under the control of something else? Something we haven't even begun to perceive? And then, of course, there's the warp. Many fans have speculated about the Tyranid's curious relationship with the Immaterium. Unlike Chaos, which thrives on emotion and psychic energy, the hive mind is something entirely different. It doesn't feed on the warp in the traditional sense, but its presence exerts an effect on the psychic fabric of the universe. The shadow in the warp is one of the most disturbing aspects of their existence, an overwhelming psychic pressure that smothers entire worlds, cutting them off from the Astronomicon and rendering psychers useless. The question is, why? Is this just a side effect of the hive mind's sheer psychic mass, or is there something more at play? Some believe that the Tyranids are actually running from something. What if they aren't the true apex predator, but merely another species trying to stay ahead of an even greater horror? The idea seems ridiculous at first. After all, what could possibly be worse than a race of creatures that exist only to consume and adapt? But when you look at the way the Tyranids operate, it starts to make a chilling kind of sense. They move in vast fleets, but they rarely establish permanent footholds. They consume and move on, as if they are always racing against time. Could there be something chasing them? Something that forced them into this endless cycle of consumption and flight? If that's true, then the most terrifying thought of all isn't that the Tyranids are here to consume us. It's that they are simply passing through. That everything we have seen so far, every war, every desperate last stand, every world lost to the Great Devourer, has just been collateral damage in a much larger conflict. And if that's the case, then the true nightmare hasn't even begun. Are the Tyranids the worst thing to ever happen to this galaxy? Maybe. But the more we learn about them, the more it feels like they might just be a prelude to something far worse. And if that's true, then we are fighting a war we don't even understand yet. The history of warfare in the 41st millennium is filled with unimaginable horrors. Wars that span entire star systems, conflicts where entire species are wiped from existence, and battles where the fate of the galaxy hangs in the balance. But even among the endless bloodshed of the Imperium's history, the wars against the Tyranids stand apart. These aren't just wars of conquest or ideological struggle. They are wars for survival, wars against an enemy that does not negotiate, does not retreat, and does not stop. And no matter how many battles the Imperium wins, the simple truth remains. Every victory against the Tyranids is only temporary. From the moment Hive Fleet Behemoth struck Macragge, it became clear that the galaxy had never faced anything quite like this before. The Ultramarines, one of the most disciplined and well-equipped Space Marine chapters, threw everything they had into the battle. It wasn't enough. Even with orbital bombardments, reinforced defenses, and the tactical genius of Marneus Calgar, they barely managed to hold the line. And when the dust settled, what was left? A victory, yes, but at a staggering cost. The planet had been devastated. The Ultramarines' first company, some of their greatest warriors, was wiped out. The greatest military force in the Imperium, outside of the Adeptus Custodes, had faced the Tyranids head-on and nearly lost everything. And that was just the first major invasion. Then came Hive Fleet Kraken, a different kind of nightmare. Where Behemoth had been a brute force assault, Kraken adapted. It attacked in waves, splitting its forces into countless tendrils that struck multiple targets at once, stretching Imperial forces to the breaking point. This was the first real indication of just how terrifyingly intelligent the hive mind was. It didn't just throw endless biomass at its enemies. It learned, it refined, it changed its approach based on past encounters. Kraken pushed deep into Imperial space, overwhelming world after world. It took the combined efforts of multiple Space Marine chapters, including the Astartes of the Death Watch, the craft world Eldar, and even desperate last-ditch efforts from the Adeptus Mechanicus to bring the fleet to a halt. And then came Leviathan, the most terrifying hive fleet yet. Unlike the previous invasions, which came from the Galactic East, Leviathan emerged from beneath the Galactic plane, striking upward in a move no one had anticipated. The Tyranids had learned from their previous failures. Instead of a frontal assault, they came from a direction where the Imperium was least prepared, and once again, entire sectors fell. When Leviathan reached Baal, the homeworld of the Blood Angels, it nearly wiped out one of the Imperium's most legendary Space Marine chapters. The sky darkened with bioships, and for every Tyranid warrior that fell, 100 more took its place. And yet, it isn't by just the Space Marines or the Imperium that suffer under the weight of the Tyranid advance. The Tau Empire, still young compared to the Imperium, has fought desperate battles against Hive Fleet Gorgon, nearly losing entire expansions of their territory. The Eldar, with all their foresight, see the Tyranids as a horror beyond reckoning. Even the Orcs, who thrive on endless war, are finding themselves struggling against an enemy that not only fights with unrelenting savagery, but also absorbs and adapts to their own brutal tactics. There are even horrifying rumors of Tyranid organisms incorporating Orcoid DNA, potentially leading to even stronger, more aggressive strains of bioforms. And then there are the worlds that have simply ceased to exist. When a hive fleet arrives in a system, it doesn't just wage war, it consumes. Planets aren't just conquered, they are erased. The very soil, the oceans, the atmosphere, everything organic is stripped away, broken down, and absorbed into the endless, a hunger of the Great Devourer. There are worlds that were once thriving Imperial bastions that are now nothing more than lifeless husks, floating in space, devoid of even the microbial life that once sustained them. When the Tyranids win, they don't leave ruins or history. They leave nothing. This is what makes the war against the Tyranids so uniquely horrifying. Against chaos, there is the hope that the forces of the Imperium can contain or even banish the demons back into the warp. Against the Necrons, there is at least the possibility of understanding and, in some cases, uneasy alliances. Even the Orcs, for all their destruction, can be fought in a way that still leaves something behind. But against the Tyranids, there is no middle ground. There is no diplomacy. There is no ceasefire. They do not leave survivors unless it serves their purposes, and they do not stop until every last resource is consumed. Some in the Imperium believe that the war against the Tyranids is unwinnable in the long run. The best they can do is delay the inevitable, hold the line, and hope that some unforeseen event changes the course of history. Others cling to the belief that there must be a way to turn the Tyranids' own biology against them, that perhaps the hive mind has a weakness that has yet to be discovered. But the truth is, no one knows for certain. What is clear, however, is that the wars against the Tyranids have already changed the fate of the galaxy, and with every battle they only grow stronger. The question is, how much longer can the galaxy hold out before the next great Tyranid war consumes it all? There's a terrifying thought that lingers in the minds of those who truly understand the scale of the Tyranid threat. What if everything we've seen so far, the hive fleets, the consumed worlds, the desperate last stands, has only been a fraction of the true invasion? What if this isn't the main event, but merely the first tendrils of something far worse? This theory isn't just paranoia. There are solid reasons to believe that what the galaxy has faced so far is nothing more than a scouting force, a test, a way for the hive mind to gauge the strengths and weaknesses of its prey before the real swarm arrives. The Tyranids are different from any other faction in Warhammer 40k because they don't just throw their full force into battle all at once. They evolve, adapt, and test their enemies before committing their greatest assets. The biggest clue to this terrifying possibility lies in the sheer number of hive fleets. So far, the Imperium and other factions have encountered multiple distinct Tyranid invasions: Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, and countless splinter fleets. Each of these hive fleets has been different in strategy, composition, and method of attack. Behemoth was a brutal frontal assault. Kraken used a multi-pronged attack to spread Imperial defenses thin, and Leviathan struck from below the galactic plane in a move that no one anticipated. This alone suggests something disturbing. The hive mind is experimenting, trying different strategies to see which one works best. And that begs the question, why would they need to experiment if this was their full force? If the Tyranids had truly committed their full strength to the galaxy, there would be no need for such tactical adjustments. The fact that they are still probing, still learning, suggests that the main bulk of their forces has yet to arrive. There's also the issue of their origin. We know that the Tyranids didn't evolve within this galaxy. They came from the void beyond, from some dark and unknown place. And if that's true, then where exactly are they coming from? The distances between galaxies are vast beyond comprehension. Even for a species as advanced as the Tyranids, crossing such a distance would take an unimaginable amount of time and resources. So why now? Why are they only just beginning to arrive in the Milky Way? The simplest explanation is that what we've seen so far is merely the vanguard, the forward scouts of a much greater swarm that is still on its way. Some fans believe that the Tyranids operate in a cyclical manner. They travel from galaxy to galaxy, consuming everything, growing stronger, and then moving on when there's nothing left. If that's the case, then we aren't witnessing the full force of the Great Devourer. We are witnessing the first stages of an extinction event that has already played out in other galaxies countless times before. And then there's the idea that the Tyranids are running from something. It sounds insane at first. How could a species that consumes everything in its path possibly be fleeing? But think about it. The Tyranids don't seem interested in establishing permanent footholds. They strip planets clean and move on, never stopping, never claiming territory the way other factions do. Their entire mode of operation suggests something disturbing. They are always moving, always consuming as if they are being pushed forward by something even worse. If that theory holds any weight, then it raises a horrifying possibility. What if the full force of the Tyranid swarm isn't coming to our galaxy to consume, but because it has no other choice? What if something even more nightmarish exists beyond the galactic rim, something so terrible that even the hive mind itself is running from it? And if that's the case, then the galaxy isn't just facing annihilation from the Tyranids. It might be standing in the path of whatever is chasing them. Of course, there's always the argument that this is all overblown, that the Tyranids we've seen so far are their full strength, and that the hive fleets are simply doing what they've always done. But that idea feels dangerously optimistic. If we assume that this is the worst of it, and it turns out we're wrong, then the galaxy is utterly doomed. The truth is, we don't know for sure. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Every battle against the Tyranids, every desperate stand, every lost world, it might just be the prelude to something far worse. And if the main body of the Great Devourer is still out there, still on its way, then everything we've seen so far will be nothing compared to what comes next. The Tyranids are terrifying not just because of their sheer numbers or their adaptability, but because they are something truly alien, something beyond the comprehension of any known species in the galaxy. Their motives, if they even have them in a way we understand, remain a mystery. The hive mind is often described as a gestalt consciousness, a vast and unified will that guides every Tyranid organism with perfect coordination. But the deeper question, the one that unsettles even the most hardened minds of the Imperium, is whether there is something more behind it. What if the hive mind isn't just a collective intelligence, but something even greater, something with a purpose beyond mere consumption? The Tyranids don't behave like a mindless swarm. Their tactics are too deliberate, their strategies too refined. Every hive fleet that invades the galaxy doesn't just charge forward blindly. It adapts, it learns, it evolves. That kind of intelligence suggests something more than just instinct. It suggests intent. Some theories propose that the hive mind might not be a single entity, but rather a network of vast, unfathomable intelligences spread across space, connected through the countless Tyranid organisms that serve as its physical extensions. In this scenario, every consumed world, every new piece of biomass, isn't just fuel, it's information. The hive mind isn't just eating the galaxy, it's understanding it. And if that's the case, then the question becomes, why? What is the ultimate goal? Is the hive mind merely a force of nature, blindly seeking to expand and consume? Or is there a purpose behind it all, something that the galaxy has yet to realize? Some have speculated that the hive mind might be far older than we assume, that it could have existed for millions, even billions of years, steadily growing and consuming across countless galaxies before reaching ours. If that's true, then the Tyranids might not just be an invasive species. They could be part of a much larger cosmic cycle, one that the Imperium and every other faction are now trapped in. Maybe every few million years, the hive mind reaches a new galaxy, devours it entirely, and then moves on, leaving nothing behind but barren husks of once thriving star systems. And if that's the case, then the fate of the Milky Way was sealed long before humanity ever crawled out of old Earth's cradle. But there's an even more disturbing theory, one that suggests the hive mind itself is not the true intelligence behind the Tyranids. What if the hive mind is just an instrument, a conduit for something even greater? The warp is filled with horrors beyond mortal comprehension, and some believe that the hive mind might be something that exists on the edge of both the physical realm and the immaterium. It doesn't function like chaos, doesn't rely on emotions or psychic energy in the way demons do, but its presence is undeniable. The shadow in the warp, that suffocating, nightmarish effect that the Tyranids bring with them, isn't just a byproduct of their psychic nature. It's something more deliberate. It silences psychers, disrupts communication, and severs entire worlds from the Astronomicon. But why? Some theories suggest that the hive mind isn't just feeding on biomass, it's feeding on something deeper. Perhaps it is a predator not just of the material world, but of the psychic one as well. What if the shadow in the warp is a kind of feeding mechanism, a way to silence all other forms of psychic energy so that only the hive mind remains dominant? And if that's true, then what happens if it succeeds? What happens if every other psychic presence is consumed or silenced? Does the hive mind simply move on, or does it transform into something else entirely? There are also more radical theories that propose the Tyranids themselves are only a fragment of something much greater. Some believe that what we see, the hive fleets, the swarms, the endless bioforms, are just the physical expression of a deeper, hidden intelligence, something that exists outside the galaxy, perhaps even outside the known universe. Maybe the Tyranids are just the material extensions of a being so vast and so utterly alien that we can't even begin to comprehend its nature. If that's true, then the hive fleets aren't just organisms. They are instruments, avatars of something waiting in the darkness, something that has been watching, waiting, and preparing for this moment for eons. Of course, there are skeptics. Many believe that the hive mind is simply what it appears to be, a massive, hyper-evolved intelligence with no grand plan beyond its endless hunger, that it doesn't need to be part of something larger or guided by an external force to be terrifying. It is already one of the greatest existential threats the galaxy has ever faced. It doesn't need an extra layer of mystery or cosmic horror to make it any worse. But even among those who dismiss the more extreme theories, there's one thing everyone agrees on. The Tyranids are not just another alien race. They are something wholly unique, something that defies the normal rules of warfare, politics, and strategy. They don't just conquer, they erase. And the true extent of their intelligence, their will, and their ultimate purpose is still a question without an answer. And that's what makes them so terrifying. Because until we understand the true nature of the hive mind, we have no idea what we are really up against. The Tyranids are a horror unlike anything the galaxy has ever faced, but what makes them even more unsettling is their strange relationship with the warp. They aren't like chaos, They don't worship the dark gods, and they don't draw power from the immaterium the way psychers or daemons do. And yet, wherever they go, the warp reacts. It shifts, distorts, and most importantly, falls silent under the crushing weight of the shadow in the warp. The shadow in the warp is one of the most terrifying phenomena in the entire setting. It's not just an effect, it's a weapon. When a hive fleet approaches a world, the shadow spreads out ahead of it, a psychic storm so immense that it drowns out everything else. Astropaths go mad, visions turn to nightmares, and even the brightest beacon of the astronomicon dims under its influence. It's as if the hive mind itself is suffocating the warp, suppressing its energy and cutting off its connection to the material world. But why? What is it about the Tyranids that makes them capable of doing something so few other forces can? The simple explanation is that the hive mind is so vast, so utterly alien, that its mere presence overwhelms the psychic field of an entire region. The collective consciousness of a billion screaming minds, all acting in perfect unison, drowns out all other signals. It's like a tidal wave crashing over a quiet sea. But that's the safe explanation, the one that assumes the Tyranids are simply a force of nature, a biological entity so massive that it disrupts the immaterium just by existing. The darker theory is that the hive mind is actively suppressing the warp for a reason. Some believe that the Tyranids are not just a physical threat, but a force that operates on a deeper level, one that might be at war with chaos itself. There's an idea floating around that the hive mind and the chaos gods are, in some way, opposing forces. Chaos feeds on emotion, thrives on individuality, and is shaped by the dreams, nightmares, and desires of living beings. The Tyranids, on the other hand, embody the absolute opposite. They have no individuality. They have no ambition, no dreams, no gods to worship. They are a singular, unified will. And if that's true, then the shadow in the warp might not just be a byproduct of their presence. It might be a deliberate attack on chaos itself. If this theory is correct, then the Tyranids are something far more terrifying than just a species of galaxy-consuming monsters. They could be a kind of anti-chaos, a force that doesn't just exist outside of the warp's influence, but actively seeks to erase it. That raises an even bigger question. If the Tyranids were to succeed, what would happen to the warp? If enough of the galaxy is consumed, if the shadow spreads far enough, could it actually smother chaos entirely? Could it starve the dark gods of the emotions they need to exist? And if that happens, what would take their place? Then there's the other, even more terrifying possibility. What if the Tyranids aren't fighting against chaos, but are instead connected to something within it? The warp is infinite, filled with horrors beyond imagination, and not all of them take the form of demons and dark gods. Some theories suggest that the hive mind itself is a kind of warp entity, but one unlike any that has ever been seen before. Maybe it isn't opposed to chaos at all. Maybe it's just another expression of it, but one so different from the traditional ruinous powers that even the Imperium hasn't realized the connection. Or worse, what if the Tyranids are feeding something within the warp? Every world they consume, every life they extinguish, every psychic scream that gets lost in the shadow. What if all of it is fueling something? Chaos thrives on war, destruction, and death, but the Tyranids don't just bring death, they bring total annihilation. They don't leave corpses to be raised by Nurgle. They don't leave despair for Slaanesh to feed on. They don't leave rage or ambition for Khorne and Tzeentch to exploit. They leave nothing. And maybe, just maybe, there's something out there that thrives on nothingness. A force in the warp that isn't about excess, but about erasure. A god of entropy, or something even worse, something that the hive mind serves in its endless hunger. It's an idea that keeps some fan theorists awake at night. What if the Tyranids aren't the biggest threat? What if they are merely the instrument of something far beyond even chaos itself? Of course, all of this is speculation. The Tyranids remain as enigmatic as ever, their connection to the warp still a mystery. But the fact remains, wherever they go, the warp reacts. It shifts, it recoils, and sometimes it falls completely silent. And in a galaxy where the immaterium is a constant presence, a force that influences everything, the idea of something capable of silencing it is almost too terrifying to comprehend. The Tyranids are a horror unlike anything the galaxy has ever faced. But what makes them even more unsettling is their strange relationship with the warp. They aren't like Chaos, they don't worship the dark gods, and they don't draw power from the immaterium the way psychers or demons do. And yet, wherever they go, the warp reacts. It shifts, distorts, and, most importantly, falls silent under the crushing weight of the shadow in the warp. The shadow in the warp is one of the most terrifying phenomena in the entire setting. It's not just an effect, it's a weapon. When a hive fleet approaches a world, the shadow spreads out ahead of it, a psychic storm so immense that it drowns out everything else. Astropaths go mad, visions turn to nightmares, and even the brightest beacon of the Astronomicon dims under its influence. It's as if the hive mind itself is suffocating the warp, suppressing its energy and cutting off its connection to the material world. But why? What is it about the Tyranids that makes them capable of doing something so few other forces can? The simple explanation is that the hive mind is so vast, so utterly alien, that its mere presence overwhelms the psychic field of an entire region. The collective consciousness of a billion screaming minds, all acting in perfect unison, drowns out all other signals. It's like a tidal wave crashing over a quiet sea. But that's the safe explanation, the one that assumes the Tyranids are simply a force of nature, a biological entity so massive that it disrupts the immaterium just by existing. The darker theory is that the hive mind is actively suppressing the warp for a reason. Some believe that the Tyranids are not just a physical threat, but a force that operates on a deeper level, one that might be at war with chaos itself. There's an idea floating around that the hive mind and the chaos gods are, in some way, opposing forces. Chaos feeds on emotion, thrives on individuality, and is shaped by the dreams, nightmares, and desires of living beings. The Tyranids, on the other hand, embody the absolute opposite. They have no individuality. They have no ambition, no dreams, no gods to worship. They are a singular, unified will. And if that's true, then the shadow in the warp might not just be a byproduct of their presence. It might be a deliberate attack on chaos itself. If this theory is correct, then the Tyranids are something far more terrifying than just a species of galaxy-consuming monsters. They could be a kind of anti-chaos, a force that doesn't just exist outside of the warp's influence, but actively seeks to erase it. That raises an even bigger question. If the Tyranids were to succeed, what would happen to the warp? If enough of the galaxy is consumed, if the shadow spreads far enough, could it actually smother chaos entirely? Could it starve the dark gods of the emotions they need to exist? And if that happens, what would take their place? Then there's the other, even more terrifying possibility. What if the Tyranids aren't fighting against chaos, but are instead connected to something within it? The warp is infinite, filled with horrors beyond imagination, and not all of them take the form of demons and dark gods. Some theories suggest that the hive mind itself is a kind of warp entity, but one unlike any that has ever been seen before. Maybe it isn't opposed to chaos at all. Maybe it's just another expression of it, but one so different from the traditional ruinous powers that even the Imperium hasn't realized the connection. Or worse, what if the Tyranids are feeding something within the warp? Every world they consume, every life they extinguish, every psychic scream that gets lost in the shadow. What if all of it is fueling something? Chaos thrives on war, destruction, and death. But the Tyranids don't just bring death. They bring total annihilation. They don't leave corpses to be raised by Nurgle. They don't leave despair for Slaanesh to feed on. They don't leave rage or ambition for Khorne and Tzeentch to exploit. They leave nothing. And maybe, just maybe, There's something out there that thrives on nothingness. A force in the warp that isn't about excess, but about erasure. A god of entropy, or something even worse. Something that the hive mind serves in its endless hunger. It's an idea that keeps some fan theorists awake at night. What if the Tyranids aren't the biggest threat? What if they are merely the instrument of something far beyond even chaos itself? Of course, all of this is speculation. The Tyranids remain as enigmatic as ever, their connection to the warp still a mystery. But the fact remains, wherever they go, the warp reacts. It shifts, it recoils, and sometimes it falls completely silent. And in a galaxy where the immaterium is a constant presence, a force that influences everything, the idea of something capable of silencing it is almost too terrifying to comprehend. The Tyranid invasion isn't just the Imperium's problem. Every major faction in the galaxy has, in one way or another, come face to face with the Great Devourer. And while each reacts differently, there's one undeniable truth. They all fear what it represents. Some see it as the ultimate predator, an unstoppable force that nothing can truly defeat. Others believe it's only the beginning of something far worse. And a few, either through arrogance or ignorance, think they might actually be able to use the Tyranids to their advantage. For the Imperium, the Tyranids are nothing short of a doomsday scenario. They challenge the very foundation of the Imperium's survival. The Imperium has fought countless enemies: Chaos, Orcs, Necrons, Eldari, but all of those threats, in some way, follow predictable rules. Chaos wants to corrupt and dominate. Orcs want to fight. The Necrons want to reclaim their ancient empire. Even the Eldari, for all their arrogance, operate on some level of reason. But the Tyranids, they don't negotiate, they don't make demands, they don't have an end goal beyond consumption. Every Imperial world they reach is doomed from the start. High-ranking officials in the Imperium, Lord Commanders, Inquisitors, and the Adeptus Mechanicus have all come to the same chilling conclusion. The Imperium, as it exists now, cannot win against the Tyranids in the long term. Every victory is temporary. Every hive fleet destroyed is merely a delay. The Imperium's greatest military minds aren't strategizing how to defeat the Tyranids. They're figuring out how to slow them down for as long as possible. The Eldari, with all their foresight, see the Tyranids as a horror that even they didn't anticipate. The craft worlds already teeter on the edge of extinction, and a full Tyranid invasion would mean the absolute end of their race. The Farseers have looked into the possible futures, and what they see is terrifying. Even their most desperate manipulations of fate can't completely steer the Tyranids away. And perhaps the most disturbing part? The Eldari don't even think the Great Devourer is the endgame. Some of their scholars believe the Tyranids are merely another piece in the galaxy's slow march toward inevitable doom. The Orcs, in their usual way, love the Tyranids, for now. The idea of an endless wave of monsters to fight excites them, and there have even been full-scale WAHs launched directly into the path of Tyranid hive fleets just for the thrill of battle. Some Orc warlords even consider the Tyranids the ultimate challenge, but the smarter Orcs, the ones with enough brain cells to put together a coherent strategy, have started to realize that the Tyranids don't fight like other enemies. Orcs expect their foes to push back, to rally, to bring an even bigger fight next time. But the Tyranids don't do that. They consume everything. And as much as the Orcs love war, they also need an ecosystem to support them. The realization that Tyranids strip planets bare, leaving nothing left for the Orcs to return to, is starting to sink in among the more cunning war bosses. The Necrons, perhaps more than anyone else, understand the true scope of the Tyranid threat. They've been around for millions of years, watching the rise and fall of civilizations, but nothing like the Great Devourer has ever come before. Some Necron dynasties believe the Tyranids could be the end of everything, even them. They're not like Chaos, which can be fought with logic and strategy. They're not like the younger races, which can be manipulated. They are a force of nature, and the Necrons, despite their vast technology, have no guaranteed way to stop them. Some cryptecs have even theorized that the Tyranids are a symptom of something much worse, an event so catastrophic that even the Necrons' ancient knowledge can't fully comprehend it. The Tau, in their naive optimism, initially believed they could study and potentially control the Tyranids. They saw them as another challenge to overcome, another problem to solve with superior technology and tactics. That illusion was shattered when Hive Fleet Gorgon hit their empire with devastating force. The Tau aren't like the Imperium. They don't have the sheer numbers to throw endless armies at the problem. Every world they lose is a significant blow to their fragile expansion, and while they've managed to hold the line in some cases, they've also realized something chilling. The Tyranids are evolving specifically to counter them. The bioforms that fight the Tau now are more resistant to their pulse weapons, faster, more cunning. The Great Devourer isn't just an enemy. It's a mirror, reflecting and improving on every tactic used against it. Even chaos, in its own twisted way, has been affected by the Tyranids. Demons don't usually concern themselves with mortal affairs, but the shadow in the warp has an undeniable effect on the Immaterium. Some believe that the Tyranids are weakening chaos by cutting off the psychic energies that fuel the dark gods. Others argue that they are simply reshaping the warp in ways we don't yet understand. There are even whispers that something within the warp is watching the Tyranids with a kind of cold, detached interest, something that may not be a chaos god in the traditional sense, but something just as terrifying. All of this brings up one of the most disturbing ideas of all. What if there are factions in the galaxy that already know the truth? What if someone out there has seen the true scale of the Tyranid threat and is simply staying silent, waiting for the rest of the galaxy to figure it out on their own? Some believe that the Old Ones, the mysterious godlike beings who shaped the early history of the galaxy, might have known about the Tyranids long before they arrived. Maybe that's why they disappeared. Maybe they weren't wiped out by the Necrons, as most assume. Maybe they saw what was coming and chose to escape rather than fight. The Great Devourer is feared by all, but the real question is whether what we've seen so far is just the first sign of something worse. If even the most powerful races in the galaxy, those with the longest histories and the greatest knowledge, are struggling to understand the full scope of this threat, then maybe we're all still blind to the bigger picture. Maybe the Tyranids are not the end of the story, but just the beginning. If what we've seen of the Tyranids so far is only the beginning, then the galaxy is in far worse trouble than anyone realizes. The idea that the hive fleets encountered so far are merely scouts, testing the waters before the full invasion arrives, is terrifying enough. But if that's the case, what happens next? What does the future of the galaxy look like if the Great Devourer is just getting started? One possible scenario is the slow, inevitable decline of every major faction. The Imperium, for all its strength, is already stretched impossibly thin. Every battle it fights against the Tyranids drains resources that cannot be replenished fast enough. Each war zone is a black hole, swallowing more troops, more ships, more worlds, and giving nothing back in return. At some point, the balance will tip. The hive mind doesn't tire, doesn't falter, and doesn't care how many times the Imperium holds the line. It only needs to win once. Maybe it won't be today, maybe it won't be in 1,000 years, but eventually the cracks will spread, and when they do, the Imperium will shatter under the weight of endless hunger. Then there's the possibility that the real invasion hasn't even started yet. Right now, we think of the Tyranids as an unstoppable swarm, but what if what we've seen so far is only a fraction of what's truly out there? The tendrils of hive fleets that have reached the Milky Way might be nothing more than forward scouts, testing different attack patterns, gathering genetic data, and mapping out weaknesses. If that's true, then everything the galaxy has experienced so far is just the equivalent of dipping a toe in the water. The main body of the Tyranid swarm could still be traveling through the void, a mass so incomprehensibly vast that it makes the hive fleets we've seen look like small raiding parties. And if that's the case, then the real war hasn't even begun yet. Some believe that the Tyranids are operating on a galactic scale that no one has truly grasped yet. Maybe they aren't just devouring this galaxy, they're using it as a staging ground for something even bigger. What if this isn't just about consuming biomass, but about transforming and refining themselves for something else? Every battle the Tyranids fight, they adapt. Every species they consume, they take something from it, something that makes them stronger. Maybe they aren't just feeding. Maybe they're evolving into something completely new, something we can't even imagine yet. And when that process is complete, what comes next? Then there's the possibility that the Tyranids aren't just a threat to the material world, but to the warp itself. The shadow in the warp is one of the strangest and most terrifying aspects of their existence, something that even the Chaos Gods seem to take notice of. If the hive mind is capable of suppressing psychic energy on a galactic scale, what happens when it reaches critical mass? What if the ultimate goal of the Tyranids, whether intentional or not, is to silence the warp entirely? If they consume enough of the galaxy, if the shadow spreads far enough, could they sever the connection between the warp and reality? Could they effectively kill the Chaos Gods? And if they do, what happens to everything else? But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the Tyranids are not the endgame, but a symptom of something worse. The theory that they are running from something has been discussed before, but if it's true, then what does that mean for the galaxy? What could possibly be so terrible that even the Great Devourer is fleeing from it? The idea that the Tyranids are merely the first wave of something even greater is a nightmare too horrible to fully comprehend. Maybe they are the harbingers of something ancient, something that exists beyond the known universe, something that has been consuming galaxies for eons. There's also the idea that the Tyranids might not even be aware of what they're doing. Maybe the hive mind isn't a godlike intelligence directing everything with a singular purpose. Maybe it's more like an instinct, a blind force that doesn't even realize the consequences of its own existence. If that's true, then the true horror isn't just that they're coming. It's that there's no stopping them, no reasoning with them, no way to make them change course. They will keep coming, they will keep consuming, and in the end, they will leave nothing behind. So what happens next? Best case scenario, the Imperium, along with the other major factions, manages to hold the line indefinitely, pushing back each new wave of Tyranids with increasingly desperate measures. Worst case scenario? The real invasion arrives, and when it does, the galaxy burns. And the scariest part? There's no way to know how close we are to that moment. It could be centuries away. It could be happening right now. The Tyranids don't need to rush. They have all the time in the universe. The only question is, how much time does the galaxy have left? If the Tyranids are truly unstoppable, is there any hope at all? Or is the galaxy simply doomed to be another meal in the endless, insatiable hunger of the hive mind? It's easy to fall into despair when looking at the sheer scale of the threat, but despite everything, there are theories, some grounded in science, some in pure desperation, about how the Tyranids might be defeated. The most obvious, and probably the least realistic solution, is to kill the hive mind itself. The idea here is that if the Tyranids function as a single entity, then cutting off the head should, in theory, kill the beast. But the problem is, no one actually knows if the hive mind even has a head. It's not like an orc war boss or a chaos champion, where you can simply take out the leader and watch their forces crumble. The hive mind is a vast, distributed intelligence, a consciousness spread across trillions of organisms. Even if you destroy a hive fleet, even if you wipe out every Tyranid, in a sector, the hive mind doesn't die, it just adapts. Then there's the idea of turning their own biology against them. Some within the Adeptus Mechanicus believe that if the Imperium could create a bioweapon capable of corrupting Tyranid genetic material, they could potentially collapse entire fleets from within. A virus, a mutagen, something that disrupts the perfect efficiency of the hive mind's organisms. It sounds plausible, but there's a massive flaw in the plan. The Tyranids are the most adaptive species in the galaxy. Even if such a weapon were developed, how long would it take for the hive mind to evolve past it? A week? A day? An hour? There's no guarantee that any biological attack wouldn't just make them stronger in the long run. Another possibility, one that's been whispered among the more radical members of the Inquisition, is the idea of using chaos against the Tyranids. If the Tyranids are a force of pure material hunger, and chaos is a force of pure immaterial madness, then maybe the two could cancel each other out. There have already been incidents where demons and Tyranids have clashed, and while the Tyranids don't seem to be susceptible to corruption in the way mortals are, they also don't seem to be able to fully consume demonic entities either. The problem is, relying on chaos is the definition of playing with fire. There's no way to control it, no way to predict what would happen if the galaxy became a battleground between the hive mind and the chaos gods. And worst of all, there's always the chance that the Tyranids could somehow find a way to adapt to the warp itself. Imagine Tyranid bioforms capable of feeding off raw chaos energy. If that happens, then the universe is doomed in ways no one has even begun to imagine. Some even speculate that the Necrons might hold the key to stopping the Tyranids. As one of the oldest and most advanced races in the galaxy, the Necrons have access to technology far beyond anything the Imperium can even comprehend. Some of their weapons operate on a scale that defies physics itself, entropic fields that can erase matter at a fundamental level, stasis weapons that freeze enemies outside of time itself. If any faction has a weapon capable of truly erasing the Tyranids, it's the Necrons. The problem? The Necrons don't care. Most Necron dynasties see the Imperium, the Eldar, and every other organic species as just as much of a nuisance as the Tyranids. To them, the galaxy was theirs long before humanity ever existed, and they don't see why they should bother saving it now. There are some Necron lords who recognize the Tyranids as a serious threat, but getting them to cooperate with the rest of the galaxy is an entirely different problem. Then there's the most radical, insane theory of all, the idea that the Tyranids might be controlled, or at least redirected. This is the kind of heresy that gets people executed on sight, but some believe that if the hive mind could be influenced, it could be turned against something else. What if instead of trying to fight the Tyranids, they could be directed toward an even greater enemy? Some suggest that a large enough psychic disruption, perhaps even something on the scale of the Emperor himself, could theoretically force the Tyranids into conflict with another existential threat, like chaos or the Necrons. But there's a problem with this theory. No one actually knows if the hive mind can be manipulated at all. If it truly is a singular godlike intelligence, then trying to influence it is about as pointless as trying to convince a black hole to change direction. And of course, there's the possibility that there is no solution, that the Tyranids are the endgame, the final force of consumption that will wipe out all life, leaving behind only an empty galaxy, stripped bare of everything. Some within the Imperium have already resigned themselves to this fate. There are even rumors of certain Inquisitors who believe that the only way to stop the Tyranids is to destroy the galaxy itself, to deny them their feast by burning everything before they can consume it. So is there a way to stop the Tyranids? Maybe, but every plan has its flaws, and every solution comes with risks that could make things even worse. The galaxy has fought impossible wars before. It has survived the Horus Heresy, the Black Crusades, the rise of Abaddon, the return of the Necrons. But the Tyranids? This is different. This isn't a war of ideology or revenge or conquest. This is a war of survival against something that does not stop, does not reason, and does not care. And the scariest part, the Tyranids are patient. They have all the time in the universe. The question isn't whether the galaxy can find a way to stop them. The question is whether there's enough time left to figure it out. The Tyranids are not just another enemy in the galaxy's long history of war. They are something different, something worse. The Imperium has fought countless wars against traitors, Xenos, and the horrors of the warp, but none of those conflicts compare to the nightmare of the Great Devourer. There is no glory in fighting the Tyranids, no chance of negotiation, no ideological battle to be won. There is only survival, and even that is temporary. For all the wars the galaxy has endured, nothing has ever been as absolute as the Tyranids. Chaos might corrupt, but it still leaves something behind. The orcs might rampage across the stars, but they thrive on endless conflict rather than destruction for its own sake. Even the Necrons, for all their cold mechanical logic, have a history, a reason for what they do. The Tyranids, they leave nothing. They exist beyond the petty struggles of empires and ideologies. They don't conquer, they don't rule, they don't leave ruins in their wake. They strip planets down to the rock, draining them of all life before moving on. They are a hunger that can never be satisfied, an extinction event in motion, a force that does not stop. The worst part is, we don't even know if we've seen their full strength yet. There is no guarantee that what we've fought so far is anything more than the first waves of an unfathomable intelligence lurking beyond the edge of known space. Maybe the real invasion hasn't even begun. Maybe the fleets we have seen are just scouting forces, testing, probing, learning. And when they've gathered enough data, when they finally decide to bring the full weight of their numbers crashing down upon the galaxy, there might not be a force in existence capable of stopping them. That's what makes the Tyranids so terrifying. Every other war, every other enemy, has some kind of goal, some kind of weakness that can be exploited. The Tyranids don't. They are pure efficiency, pure evolution, pure consumption. Their strength is that they are never the same enemy twice. Every time the Imperium or the Eldar or the Tau think they found a way to stop them, the Tyranids adapt, evolve, and return stronger than before. There is no technological advantage that will last forever, no grand strategy that will outthink them, no fortress world that can hold them back indefinitely. Some believe that there is still a way to stop them, that maybe the Necrons hold the key, or that Chaos and the Tyranids will ultimately destroy each other, or that the Imperium will discover some last-ditch weapon capable of turning the tide. But those are just hopes, desperate prayers whispered into the void. Right now, the reality is far more grim. The Tyranids are already here. They are already winning battles. They are already consuming worlds, and there is no indication that they will ever stop. So what happens next? The galaxy fights. It has no other choice. Every planet lost, every battle fought, every hive fleet destroyed. It's all just delaying the inevitable. But that's the thing about Warhammer 40K. The Imperium was never meant to win. The Eldar were never meant to find salvation. The Tau were never meant to build their utopia. The setting was never about victory, but about struggle, about the desperate, endless battle to hold on for just a little longer. And if the Tyranids are truly the endgame, the final force of annihilation that will consume everything, then maybe the only thing that matters is how long the galaxy can resist before the darkness takes everything. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something we're all missing. Maybe, just maybe, there is a way to stop them. If you've got a theory, I'd love to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this dive into the horror of the Tyranids, make sure to like and subscribe. There's always more to discuss, and trust me, in a universe as vast and terrifying as Warhammer 40K, the Tyranids are just one of many nightmares waiting in the dark.